He grabbed her arm before she could turn away. "Where is Evelyn?" His voice cracked down the middle. Raw, desperate, a man who had cleaned every corner of his house, picked wildflowers at dawn, and prepared a sunrise bedroom for a woman who was never coming. The stranger didn't flinch. She looked straight into his eyes and said the four words that collapsed everything he had built his hope upon: "I'm not your bought bride." The flowers fell from his hand. His whole future, 7 months of letters 31, promises gone in one breath from a woman he had never seen before in his life. Subscribe to our channel, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Luke Callahan had not slept the night before. He told himself it was the heat, the dry Texas air that pressed against a man's chest and made breathing feel like work. But that was a lie, and Luke had never been particularly good at lying, not even to himself. The truth was simpler and more embarrassing than insomnia. He was nervous. A 32-year-old rancher, a man who had wrestled calves in mud and faced down a charging bull with nothing but a rope, and his own stubbornness, was standing in front of a mirror at 5 in the morning, trying to decide if his good shirt made him look like he was trying too hard. He decided it did not. He put it on anyway. The ranch house was cleaner than it had been in years. Luke had spent 3 days on it, scrubbing the kitchen floor on his hands and knees, rehanging the curtain rod in the front room that had been crooked since the winter before last, finally fixing the hinge on the back door that had been squealing since spring. He had even put fresh ticking on the mattress in the east-facing bedroom, the one where the sunrise came through the window in long golden bands every morning. He thought she would like that. She had written about sunrises in her 3rd letter. She said they made her feel like the world was being given back to her fresh every day. He had read that line so many times he could recite it without thinking. He had read all of the letters that many times. 7 months of correspondence. 31 letters exchanged he had counted, and Luke felt in a way he hadn't felt about anything in years, that he knew Evelyn Harper. Not the knowing that comes from seeing a person every day, from watching how they hold a coffee cup, or what they do when they think no one is looking. It was a different kind of knowing. A slower kind. The kind built from words chosen carefully from a person deciding what to put on paper and what to leave off. He knew what made her laugh. He knew she was afraid of being ordinary. He knew she had a garden she talked about like it was a person, a small plot behind her sister's house where she grew tomatoes and marigolds and something she called the stubborn lavender that refused to bloom the way the books said it should. He also knew, because she had told him plainly in her 5th letter, that she was not the kind of woman who expected romance to look like something out of a novel. She expected it to look like effort, like showing up, like a man who fixed what was broken and stood where he said he would stand. Luke figured he could manage that. So he stood on the Sunset Ridge platform with wildflowers in his hand, not a bouquet exactly, more like a collection of whatever had been blooming at the edge of the creek that morning, and he waited for the 9:40 train from San Antonio. He had been there since 9. He would have been there at 8 if Bill Hadley at the feed store hadn't stopped him and asked about the south fence repair, and Luke had spent 20 minutes discussing fence posts when his mind was entirely somewhere else. The train was on time, which felt like a good sign. Luke was not generally a man who believed in signs. He was practical in the way that ranching made a man practical. He believed in weather patterns and soil conditions and the honest mathematics of what a piece of land could carry. But he had been looking for good signs all morning, small permissions from the universe to allow himself something he hadn't allowed in a long time. Hope. The platform filled with the usual chaos of arrival. Steam noise, the shuffle of bodies' trunks being hauled, children shouting, the conductor calling out connections. Luke stood still in the middle of it and watched the passengers come down. He was looking for dark hair. Evelyn had described herself in her 8th letter, not at length. She had been almost shy about it, but she had mentioned dark hair and what she called unremarkable height, and a blue traveling dress she had bought specifically for the journey. She said she would carry a carpet bag with a broken clasp that she kept meaning to fix. He saw the blue dress immediately. He saw the carpet bag. He stepped forward, and then the woman turned. Luke stopped walking, completely. The flowers went slack in his hand. She was not Evelyn. He knew this with a certainty he couldn't explain, and couldn't argue with the way a man knows sometimes when something has gone wrong before he can name the specific thing. The face was different. The posture was different. Even the way she stood on the platform was different. Not the quiet confidence Evelyn's letters had conveyed, but something more guarded, more wary, the stillness of a person who was expecting to be challenged. She was scanning the crowd. Her eyes moved carefully, methodically, the way a person looks when they're not sure what they're looking for, but they'll know it when they see it. Her eyes found him. And something in her face shifted, not toward relief and not toward warmth. Toward something harder, something that looked almost like resolve. She walked toward him. Luke did not move. He couldn't quite explain why. Something about the way she was moving made the skin on the back of his neck go tight. She stopped 2 feet away and looked up at him. She had dark hair like Evelyn had described, but the face was different. Similar, maybe the same jaw, the same shape of the eyes, but different enough that there was no question. This was not the woman he had been writing to. "Are you Luke Callahan?" she said. Her voice was quiet, careful, the voice of a person managing something. "I am," he said. She took a breath. He watched her take it, watched her square her shoulders the way a person does before they say something they've rehearsed and still aren't ready to say. "I'm not your bought bride," she said softly. The world went very still. Luke heard the train. He heard the platform. He heard Bill Hadley somewhere behind him laughing at something, and he could not make any of it fit together into a sentence. "My name is Clara Harper," she said. "I'm Evelyn's sister." He stared at her. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to hear all of it before you say anything. Can you do that?" "Done." He took her to the only place he could think of, not the ranch, not yet, but the small restaurant at the end of Main Street, where the owner, a widow named Mrs. Dent, served coffee strong enough to make a man's hands shake and didn't ask questions about her customers. Luke had eaten there alone every Thursday for 4 years. He had never brought anyone with him. Clara sat across from him with her carpet bag on the seat beside her and her hands folded on the table, and told him the truth. It came out in pieces, not all at once, the way hard things always come when a person has been carrying them long enough that they've stopped knowing where to begin. Evelyn had been ill. That was how it started. Last winter, a sickness that began like a cold and didn't end like one that moved deeper and stayed and refused every remedy their doctor in Galveston could offer. By February, she had been confined mostly to bed. By March, she had stopped pretending she was going to get better. "She didn't want to stop writing to you," Clara said. Her voice was controlled, but just barely. "She talked about you. She talked about your letters. She—" Clara stopped, looked at her coffee cup, looked back up. "She said you were the first man in years who had written to her like she was a person and not a transaction." Luke said nothing. She couldn't hold a pen anymore in March. Her hands— Clara stopped again. "I started writing the letters for her. I would sit beside her and she would tell me what to say, and I would write it down and send it. That's how it went until—" She paused. "Until it didn't need to go that way anymore. Because she was gone." The word landed between them like something dropped. Luke set his coffee cup down very carefully. He had the sudden irrational thought that if he moved too quickly, something would break. "When?" he said. His voice came out flat. "April 14th, Clara said. He had received a letter dated April 18th. He had reread it 2 days ago. He opened his mouth, closed it. Something was happening in his chest that he didn't have a name for grief, maybe for a woman he had never met, which seemed impossible and yet was completely real and sitting across from him in the face of her sister. "The April letter," he said slowly. Clara met his eyes and didn't look away. "I wrote it," she said. "Alone. I know that was wrong. I have known it every day since. I told myself I thought if I—" She stopped, started again. "She asked me to come and tell you in person. She didn't want a letter. She said you deserved better than a letter." He stared at her. "She made me promise," Clara said. "So I came." The restaurant went on around them. Mrs. Dent moving between tables, the smell of coffee and old wood. Someone at the counter talking about the summer grazing, and Luke sat in the middle of all of it and felt like a man who had walked into a room and found the floor missing. "She was real to me," he said. It came out rougher than he intended. "I know I never met her. I know what this looks like, letters a stranger on a train. I know what it looks like. But she was real. She was real," Clara said quietly. "She was very real, and she—" Clara's voice broke for the first time cleanly, one crack in the surface. "She wanted you to know that the letters were honest. Even the ones I wrote alone. Everything in them was true to who she was. I didn't invent her." Luke was quiet for a long time. Clara let him be quiet. That was the first thing he noticed about her. She did not rush to fill the silence. She sat with it the way a person sits with something heavy, not pretending it wasn't there, but not trying to move it before it was ready to move. "What are you planning to do now?" he asked eventually. "I have a return ticket," she said. "Train leaves the day after tomorrow. I have a room at the boarding house tonight and tomorrow." She said it simply, practically, with no drama. "I didn't want to assume anything." He nodded slowly, looked out the window, looked back. "All right," he said. So, she ate supper with him that evening. It was not his plan. His plan had been to drive back to the ranch and sit with what he had been told and decide what kind of man he was going to be about it. But Mrs. Dent had come by to refill their cups and asked if they'd be wanting the evening special, and before Luke had formed an opinion on the question, Clara had said yes, thank you, and somehow that was that. They ate in a silence that was not comfortable exactly, but was not hostile either. It was the silence of two people who had already said significant things and were not sure what came after significant things. Clara ate efficiently, without self-consciousness. She finished everything on her plate. Luke noticed because it was the kind of detail he noticed a person who didn't waste things, who ate without making a performance of it. "You're a bookkeeper," he said at some point. He remembered it from one of the early letters. Clara looked up. "I was. In Galveston. I left the position when Evelyn got sick." "What did you do before that?" "Records and accounts for a shipping company." She said it plainly, without apology. "I did their reconciliations, tracked cargo documentation, made sure their payment records matched their actual cargo movements." A small pause. "It was not exciting work, but it needed to be done correctly, and I did it correctly." "That sounds like something Evelyn would have said," Luke said. Clara looked at him for a moment. "It probably was," she said quietly. "I may have borrowed more of her voice than I realized." They were both quiet again. "Did she tell you much about the letters?" Luke asked. What you wrote, what I wrote back." "I read all of them," Clara said. "Both directions." And she seemed to choose her words the way a careful person chooses their footing on uncertain ground. "You wrote honestly," she said. "More honestly than most men do. You didn't try to make yourself into something you weren't. You told her the ranch was hard work, and the winters were difficult, and you weren't always good company. You told her the truth about what you were offering." She paused. That mattered to her. That mattered to me too, reading them. Luke looked at his plate. "I also noticed—" Clara said, her tone shifting almost imperceptibly, becoming more careful, more precise, the way a person sounds when they've moved from conversation to information, that several of the letters mentioned payments. He looked up. "Land payments," she said. "To a company called Briggs Development. I noticed because you mentioned them twice in passing, and the amounts were—" She stopped. "I'm sorry, this isn't my business. You've had enough for one day." "What about them?" Luke said. She looked at him steadily. "The amounts didn't match a standard development agreement. Not in my experience. It's possible I'm wrong. I only do accounts, I don't know land contracts." She folded her napkin. "I shouldn't have said anything." "No," Luke said. "Tell me what you mean." "Tin," She stayed the first night at the boarding house as planned, but the second morning she showed up at the ranch. Luke was in the yard when he heard the wagon. He had hired a boy named Tommy Reese to run errands in town, and Clara had apparently persuaded Tommy to bring her out. She climbed down with her carpet bag and a leather satchel he hadn't seen before, and she looked at him with the expression of a person who had made a decision overnight and was not entirely at peace with it, but was committed nonetheless. "I'd like to see the contracts," she said, "if you'll show them to me." He stood there for a moment. Then he said, "Come inside." He had the documents in a tin box in the back room, not particularly organized, because organization of paperwork was not among Luke's stronger qualities. Land deeds, payment receipts, the contract with Briggs Development that Harlan Briggs had presented to him 8 months ago with the easy confidence of a man who considers paperwork a formality. Luke had read it twice and signed it. Briggs had shaken his hand and told him the railroad was coming through the Creek Valley by next spring, that the land values would double, that getting in ahead of the survey team was the smart move. The payments were structured quarterly, small enough not to hurt, large enough to feel like an investment. Clara spread the documents on the kitchen table and went silent. Not the polite silence of a guest in someone else's space, the absolute focused silence of a person who is reading. She read for 45 minutes without speaking. Luke made coffee. She didn't touch it. He walked out to check on the horses and came back, and she was still reading, except now she had a small notebook open beside the contracts and was writing things down in a quick, precise hand. "Luke," she said finally. He came to the table. She pointed to a line in the Briggs Development contract. "This is the company name, Briggs Development Associates, registered in..." She pointed to another line. "Except there's no registration date. There's a registration number, but registration numbers in Texas are issued sequentially. This number is out of sequence for any company registered in the county in the last 5 years." Luke leaned over. He had not noticed that. He didn't know what to notice. "And this," she said, moving to a payment receipt. "This is payment 2 made to the same company. But look at the payee line on payment 1. She set them side by side. The handwriting is different, not slightly different. The way a clerk copies a name a different day the letter forms are completely different. Someone changed how they spelled associates between payment 1 and payment 2. Luke looked. She was right. He could see it now that she pointed, but he would not have seen it without her. "And this." She moved to the development agreement itself, the one Harlan Briggs had presented as the main document. Turned to the back page. "Witness signatures, 2 required. 1 is Harlan Briggs. The second." She tilted the page toward him. "The second signature is Wendell Cole." Luke went very still. "Cole is the county officer." "Yes," Clara said quietly. "He is." Briggs had him witness the contract. Possibly. Or someone added Cole's signature after Briggs had already signed. She said it carefully as a possibility, not a conclusion. "I can't tell you which from this alone, but a county officer witnessing a private development contract is unusual. It suggests either a relationship that predates this document or a reason to want an official name on something unofficial." Luke sat down at the kitchen table. He looked at the contract he had signed. The signature he had put on it in good faith 8 months ago, while Harlan Briggs stood across from him, telling him about the railroad, about the future, about how the smart ranchers were already getting positioned. He thought about the quarterly payments he had made, the money he had pulled from the ranch's slim margins and handed over without question because he had been told it was an investment. He thought about the east bedroom with the sunrise window, the clean floors, the wildflowers he had picked at dawn. He thought about how much of the last several months he had spent preparing for a future that was being quietly dismantled around him. "How bad is it?" he said. Clara did not soften it. He was grateful for that. "I don't know yet," she said. "But I think it's worse than just your ranch." The rest of that day and well into the night was Clara and her notebook and the documents spread across Luke's kitchen table. She was methodical in a way that was almost alarming to watch. She moved through the records in a specific order she appeared to have established in her own mind without explaining it, and she wrote things down with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this kind of work for years. Luke brought her coffee 3 times. The third time she actually drank it. At some point around 6 in the evening, she looked up and said, "Do you know your neighbors well? The ranchers east along the creek." "Some of them," Luke said. "Hank Delaney's got the property east of mine. Pete Sorensen is further on. There's a widow, May Garrett, who's been working her place alone since her husband died 2 years ago." "Have any of them mentioned Briggs?" Luke thought about it. "Hank said something once, maybe 3 months back. He said someone had come by asking about his south pasture acreage." He paused. "I didn't think anything of it." "Did he mention the railroad?" Clara said. Luke's jaw tightened. "Yeah. He mentioned the railroad." Clara turned back to the documents and made a notation. "I'd like to talk to them," she said. "Clara," Luke said, "you're supposed to be on a train tomorrow morning." She looked at him. Then she looked at the table. Then she looked at him again. "Yes," she said. "I know." She did not say anything else, and Luke did not ask her to stay, but he moved her return ticket to the far end of the table, under the lamp, where neither of them had to look at it. That night, Luke sat on the front porch after Clara had gone back to the boarding house in town. He had driven her himself. The conversation between them quiet and strange, and not uncomfortable the way he expected. He sat with his coffee going cold and thought about Evelyn, about the letters, about what it meant to grieve a woman he had never met. He thought it should feel false. It didn't. The letters had been real. The conversations, even if conducted through her sister's hand, had been real. The version of himself he had become in 7 months of writing to someone who actually read what he wrote that had been real. He thought about the contract on his table, the false registration number, the different handwriting, Wendell Cole's signature on a document it had no business being on. He thought about the wildflowers he had left in a jar on the kitchen counter, because he hadn't known what else to do with them. Then he thought about Clara sitting in a boarding house room in town with her leather satchel and her notebook and the focused, careful mind that had caught in an hour what he had missed in 8 months. He went inside and got a piece of paper. He sat down and wrote 2 sentences. "If you want to see Hank Delaney's records, I can take you out there in the morning. He'll talk to me." He left it with the boy at the boarding house front desk. He drove back to the ranch in the dark and went to sleep for the first time in a long time, feeling something that wasn't quite peace and wasn't quite dread. Something in between. Something like being in the middle of a thing that wasn't finished yet and deciding that was all right. By the time Luke pulled into the yard the next morning, a note had already been slipped under his front door. 7 o'clock. I'll be ready. He read it twice. Then he put it in his shirt pocket. Then he went to start the coffee. The wrong woman had arrived on the right train. And whatever was coming, whatever Harlan Briggs had set in motion, and Wendell Cole had signed his name to, and the half-dozen ranchers along the creek were slowly losing without knowing it was about to meet something it had not planned for. A woman with a notebook, a dead sister's courage, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Hank Delaney was not a man who trusted easily, and he made no effort to hide it. He was standing in his doorway when Luke pulled up, arms crossed, jaw set, with the particular expression of a man who had recently learned that being friendly to strangers was an expensive habit. He looked at Luke. He looked at Clara, sitting on the wagon seat beside Luke. He looked back at Luke. "Who's this?" he said. "Her name is Clara Harper," Luke said. "She's good with accounts and records. I'd like her to look at whatever Briggs gave you." Hank didn't move. "Why?" "Because she looked at mine yesterday and found 3 things wrong in 45 minutes that I never saw in 8 months," Luke said. "That's why." Hank was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped back from the door. Clara was already climbing down from the wagon. Hank's records were worse than Luke's, not in the sense that they were more fraudulent, but in the sense that they were more disorganized, stuffed into a wooden crate under a workbench in the back room, receipts folded into contracts, folded into letters, all of it pressed together into a kind of financial sediment. Clara pulled it out without comment and started sorting. Luke and Hank stood in the kitchen and drank coffee and said almost nothing for 20 minutes. "Where'd you find her?" Hank said, eventually low enough that it wouldn't carry to the back room. She found me, Luke said. It's a long story. She know what she's doing. From the back room without looking up, Clara said, yes. Hank looked at Luke. Luke looked at his coffee. She worked through Hank's records in just under an hour. What she found was different from Luke's documents, but connected to them in a way that made Luke's neck go tight when she explained it. Hank had received a different version of the Briggs development contract, different language in the easement clause, a slightly different quarterly payment structure, but the registration number on the company letterhead was from the same false sequence. Not the same number, a consecutive one. As if someone had assigned themselves a block of numbers and was working through them, one contract at a time. They didn't reuse the same false number, Clara said, setting both contracts side by side on Hank's kitchen table. They used sequential false numbers, which means they planned for multiple contracts from the beginning. This wasn't improvised. This was a system. Hank stared at the two documents. How many ranches you think they hit? I don't know yet, Clara said. But the numbers suggest at least 6 sequential contracts were prepared, possibly more. She looked at Luke. Who else is along the creek? They went to Pete Sorensen's place next. Then to May Garrett's. By the time they reached May Garrett's kitchen, a small tidy space that smelled like coffee and determination. Clara had 4 sets of contracts spread in her memory, if not on the table. And she was moving through May's paperwork with the focused speed of someone whose mental pattern had fully clicked into place. May Garrett was 61 years old, had been running her ranch alone for 2 years, and had the kind of quiet toughness that came not from being invulnerable, but from having survived things and decided to keep going anyway. She watched Clara work with the expression of a woman who deeply appreciated competence. Briggs came to me in January, May said. Brought a man with him. Young man didn't say much, just stood there. Briggs did all the talking. She paused. He knew things he shouldn't have known. About my finances, about the property line dispute I'd had with the county last year. He knew about it before I told him. Clara's pen stopped moving. Luke looked up. He knew about your county dispute, Clara said carefully. Knew the specific amounts involved, May said. Knew which officer had handled the filing. She set her coffee cup down. At the time I thought maybe he'd just done his research, asked around town. But now... The officer who handled your filing, Clara said. Do you remember his name? May looked at her steadily. Wendell Cole, she said. The kitchen went very quiet. Luke pushed back from the table and stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room for a moment. And when he turned around, his expression had settled into something harder than it had been that morning. He's feeding them information, Luke said. Cole. He has access to county records, every property dispute, every financial filing, every land assessment. He knows which ranches are vulnerable, and he's telling Briggs which ones to approach. That's what it looks like, Clara said. She said it quietly, without drama, but her pen was moving again, and she was writing quickly. It's not proof yet, but it's a pattern. How is that not proof? Hank said. He had followed them to May's place in his own wagon uninvited, and nobody had told him not to. Because a pattern is a direction, Clara said. Proof is a destination. We're not there yet. May reached across the table and put her hand briefly on Clara's arm. You keep going, she said. You're the first person who's made sense of any of this since January. Clara did not look up from her notebook, but something in her shoulders shifted just slightly, just enough to notice if you were watching, and Luke was watching. He had been watching since the train platform. He wasn't entirely sure when that had started feeling intentional. They drove back to Luke's ranch in the late afternoon, with Clara's notebook full, and Luke's mind running in several directions at once. The wagon was quiet, but not empty, the way silence sometimes is. It was the quiet of 2 people with too much to think about, and not enough space yet to think it. 6 contracts, Clara said at some point. Not looking at him. Looking at the road ahead. At minimum, sequential false registration numbers. A county officer with access to financial records and property filings providing information on vulnerable targets. Quarterly payments structured small enough to seem reasonable, but large enough that over 2 or 3 years they represent significant transfer of capital. She paused. And somewhere a land claim. The payments are just the first stage. What do you mean? Luke said. The money isn't the end goal, Clara said. It's the mechanism. If they can establish a pattern of payment money moving from ranchers to Briggs Development, they can construct a legal argument that the ranchers entered into a development agreement. And if the agreement contains certain language, she opened her notebook without looking at it, as if she already knew the page. Luke, your contract has a clause in Section 4. Default provisions. If payments stop, or if the development agreement is disputed by either party, the company retains right of first claim on the underlying property. Luke stared at the road. I signed that, he said. You signed it, she said. So did Hank. So did May. Except her version uses slightly different language that achieves the same thing. She closed the notebook. They're not building a railroad. They're building a legal mechanism to claim your land when they're ready to trigger the default. Luke's hands tightened on the reins. And Cole, he said. Cole would handle the county filing when the claim comes in, Clara said. Which means the paperwork would move through the exact office of the exact man who helped design the scheme. She paused. It's almost elegant if you don't think about the people it destroys. Luke was quiet for a long time. Why haven't they triggered it yet? He said. Because they're not ready, Clara said. They need all the contracts in place first, or they need something else, some document, some final piece. The claim has to be airtight before they file, or a judge throws it out and they lose everything. She looked at him. They're still setting up, which means we still have time. How much time? She didn't answer immediately. I don't know, she said. But not much. The quarterly payments are due again in 6 weeks. If they're going to move, it'll be around that window. Luke pulled the wagon into his yard and sat there for a moment without climbing down. The evening light was doing something to the land around the ranch that he usually noticed and appreciated and did not notice or appreciate at all right now. Your train ticket, he said. I know, Clara said. You said you were leaving tomorrow. I know what I said. He looked at her. She looked at him. If you stay, he said carefully, I don't want you to think it's because I'm not asking you to. He stopped. Started again. I don't want this to be another arrangement, another transaction. I've had enough of those. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm not staying because of an arrangement. I'm staying because 6 ranches full of people are about to lose everything they own, and I'm the one who figured out how the scheme works. A pause. And because Evelyn would have stayed. Luke nodded slowly. Then he climbed down from the wagon and went to help her down from the other side, which he hadn't done before, and she took his hand briefly and then let it go, and neither of them made anything of it. Inside, the wildflowers were still in the jar on the kitchen counter. They were past their best now, drooping at the stems, but Clara set her satchel down next to them and unpacked her notebook onto the table, without mentioning them or moving them. Luke put the coffee on. They went back to work. The second full day in Sunset Ridge was the day Clara understood the scope of what they were dealing with, and the understanding settled over her, not like a revelation, but like a weight she'd been lifting for 2 days and had finally recognized the full measure of. She sent Luke to town the next morning with a specific list. Not for supplies, for information. She needed the county's public land registry entries for the past 18 months. The names of any businesses registered in the county in that period, and she said this carefully, watching his face. The name of whoever had access to the financial hardship filings in the county clerk's office. Luke looked at the list. Cole handles most of the county office work personally. I know, Clara said. Don't go through Cole. Is there anyone else in that office? Luke thought about it. There's a young woman, Nora Pines. She's been there about a year. She mostly does the filing, the clerical work. Does she know you? By sight. She attended the same church as my neighbor for a while. Go to her, Clara said. Don't ask for anything that sounds like an investigation. Just say you're verifying your property registration, that you want to confirm the records are current. People are usually willing to confirm existing records. It's pulling new information that makes them nervous. She paused. And Luke, don't tell her what you're looking for. Just look. He came back at midday with 3 pages of notes written in his own cramped, earnest handwriting. He was not a practiced note-taker, and the pages showed it, but the information was there. Clara read them at the kitchen table, with the focused absorption of someone piecing together a picture from the edges in. The county land registry showed 6 properties along the Creek Valley that had received what the registry called pending development interest notations in the past 14 months. Pending development interest was a real but rarely used designation. It signaled that a registered development company had filed preliminary interest in adjacent or overlapping land. It wasn't a claim. It wasn't legally binding. But it created a paper trail, suggesting an established relationship between the development company and the land. Someone had filed those notations without telling the ranchers. Without telling Hank Delaney or Pete Sorensen or May Garrett that their land had been flagged in the county registry as pending development interest. That's when the clock starts, Clara said. She was talking half to herself and half to Luke, who was sitting across the table watching her read, with the expression of a man who has decided to trust a process he doesn't fully understand. Once that notation is in the registry, the development company has an official recorded relationship with the property. When they trigger the default clause when the payments stop, or they manufacture a dispute, they file the land claim against a property that already shows registered development interest in county records. She looked up. A judge who doesn't look closely will see an established development relationship and a signed contract with a default clause and rule for the company. It takes 30 minutes and it looks legitimate. Can it be undone? Luke said. If the company registration is fraudulent, if we can prove those sequential numbers don't correspond to any legally chartered company, the entire contract is void. The default clause is unenforceable. The land claim fails. She set the pages down. But we need the original registration records. Texas Secretary of State, Austin. That's 4 days by post, Luke said. I know, Clara said. We write today. She drafted the letter herself, Luke watching over her shoulder, and when she finished, he read it twice and said, You write like a lawyer. I write like someone who spent 5 years making sure documents said exactly what they needed to say and nothing extra, she said. It's close, but it's not the same. He looked at her for a moment. Close enough, he said. She folded the letter, looked at him. There's something else, she said. Luke sat down. She had been holding the next part since the night before, not from reluctance to tell him, but because she hadn't been certain of it yet. She was certain now. The quarterly payment schedule in your contract, she said. Briggs's company is receiving money from 6 ranches simultaneously. Even small amounts add up. But the payment structure is not set up like an investment receipt. It's set up like a loan repayment. Same structure. Regular intervals, fixed amounts, penalty clauses for late payment. She paused. Which means somewhere there's a lender. Someone backing Briggs who is expecting those payments to flow through to them. She looked at him directly. This isn't Harlan Briggs working alone. Someone is financing this operation. Someone with the capital to wait out the setup period, the connections to get a county officer involved, and enough legal knowledge to construct contracts that look valid on first read. Luke said nothing for a long moment. You think it goes higher than Colin Briggs? I think it almost has to, Clara said. The scheme is too well constructed for 2 men with a Sunset Ridge County office in a charming manner. Someone drew up those contracts. Someone with legal training. You're saying there's a third party. At minimum, she said. And whoever they are, they're staying invisible. Briggs is the face. Cole is the mechanism. But the architecture of this, the sequenced registration numbers, the pending development notations, the loan-structured payments, someone planned that from behind a desk somewhere, and then sent Briggs out to execute it. The kitchen was very quiet. Luke stood up and walked to the window. In that way he had not pacing exactly just moving when staying still became impossible, and he stood there for a moment and then said without turning around, Evelyn would have liked you." Clara went still. "Not because you're her sister," he said. "Because of the way you work, the way you don't stop when it gets complicated." He turned. She wrote about that, actually, in one of the early letters. She said the thing she respected most in a person was the kind of stubbornness that looks like calm. Clara looked at him for a long time. Something passed across her face, complicated and quiet and not entirely resolved. "She wrote that to you," she said. "Letter 4, he said. March. Clara looked down at the table. When she looked back up, her expression had settled into something that was not quite grief and not quite warmth, but occupied the territory between them. "I wrote that line," she said softly. "I wrote that one myself. Evelyn was having a hard day, and she asked me to just write what I thought, and she'd tell me if she wanted to change anything." A pause. She didn't change anything. The sentence sat between them with its full weight. Luke nodded once slowly. Then he said, "We should get this letter to the post office before it closes." "Yes," Clara said. She picked up the letter. "We should." They went to town together for the second time, and the ride was different from the first. Not dramatically, not in any way that would have been visible to anyone watching from the road, but the silence had changed character. It was no longer the silence of two strangers with a shared problem. It had become something else. Something with more room in it. At the post office, Luke handed the letter across the counter and paid the postage and turned to find Clara already at the window looking out at Main Street, with her arms folded in the way she did when she was working through something internally. He stood beside her and followed her gaze. Harlan Briggs was crossing the street on the far side, moving toward the county office. He was a broad man, well-dressed by Sunset Ridge standards, with the easy walk of someone who believed the ground belonged to him. He didn't look toward the post office. "Have you spoken to him since you signed the contract?" Clara said quietly. "Twice," Luke said. "He came by the ranch in February to check on some survey markers. In April, he sent a man to confirm the second payment had been received." "He'll come again," Clara said, "before the next payment window. He'll want to confirm everything is still on track." She paused. "When he does, don't tell him anything has changed. Don't mention me. Don't mention the records." Luke looked at her. "You want me to let him think we don't know?" "I want the scheme to keep running exactly as designed for a few more weeks," she said. "Because the moment Briggs knows someone is looking, he will move. He'll trigger the default early file, whatever he can file before we can stop him, and then we're fighting a claim in court instead of preventing one." She turned from the window. "Right now, he thinks 6 isolated ranchers are sitting on their land making payments like good cooperative victims. That's our advantage. We cannot waste it." Luke looked at Briggs's retreating back across the street. Then he looked at Clara. "You've done this before," he said. "This kind of untangling. Exposing something that's been deliberately hidden." She considered the question honestly. "Not exactly like this," she said. "But at the shipping company there were discrepancies. Cargo that was recorded as delivered but wasn't payments that didn't match manifests. I found it because I was paying attention when no one thought anyone was paying attention." She paused. "Men like Briggs rely on the assumption that the people they target won't know what to look for. They're usually right." "But not this time," Luke said. Clara looked at him. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. The closest he'd seen. "Not this time," she said. That night, for the first time since she arrived, Clara ate supper at Luke's kitchen table, rather than going back to the boarding house. It was not a planned thing. They had been working until the food needed to happen, and it was simpler to just stay. Luke cooked something functional and unapologetic: beans, salt pork, cornbread, coffee. Clara ate without commenting on it in either direction, which Luke found he appreciated. After the dishes, she stayed at the table with her notebook, and he sat across from her with a piece of paper and began writing names. Every rancher along the creek he could think of. Every property boundary he knew, trying to construct a map in words because he didn't have the materials for a real one. They worked like that for an hour, occasionally asking each other questions across the table, building the picture one piece at a time. At some point, Clara said without looking up, "You don't have to keep staying up. I can work alone." "I know," Luke said. He didn't move. She looked up at that, studied him for a moment, then went back to her notebook. Later, much later, when the lamp had burned low and the notes covered most of the table, Clara sat back and rubbed her eyes with the heels of her hands and said, "There's a name I keep coming back to." Luke looked up. "The pending development notations in the county registry," she said. "Someone filed those, not Briggs. He's not a county official. Not Cole directly, because Cole would have recused himself from anything with his own signature on it. But the filings are dated and the dates are all on Thursdays. Every single one. 6 properties, 6 filings, all on Thursdays." Luke thought about it. "The circuit judge comes through on Fridays," he said slowly. "County office is busiest on Thursdays getting filings prepared. Which means it would be easy to slip something into the queue on a Thursday without it standing out," Clara said. "Whoever filed those notations knew the office schedule well enough to use it as cover." She paused. "That's not someone working from the outside. That's someone who works in that office. Or worked in it." Luke sat very still. "Nora Pines," Clara said quietly. "Or someone before her. Someone who left recently. I need to know who was in that office before her." Luke thought about it for a long moment. "There was a man," he said slowly, "before Nora. He left about 16 months ago. Moved on, people said. His name was Garrett." He paused. "Not May Garrett's husband, different family. First name Arthur." Clara was writing. "Arthur Garrett," she said. "And the first pending development notation in the registry, what was the date on it?" Luke looked at his notes from Nora Pines's records. 15 months ago, he said. Clara looked up, met his eyes. 1 month after Arthur Garrett left the county office, she said. The lamp flickered between them. Luke said nothing. He didn't need to. The number had already landed 15 months 1 month after the Thursdays, the sequential registration numbers, the invisible hand behind Briggs and Cole, and it was all pointing in the same direction toward a shape that was becoming clearer by the hour. Clara closed her notebook, set her pen down, looked at her hands for a moment, and then looked up at Luke. "I need you to understand something," she said. "What we're building here, the evidence, the pattern, the legal argument, it's strong, it's real. But right now, it's paper, and paper needs a courtroom to become justice." She paused. "We need a judge who hasn't been touched by this, who has jurisdiction over county officer conduct. And we need the other ranchers ready to stand together because one man's records prove one man's problem. 6 men's records prove a conspiracy." Luke held her gaze. "Judge Elias Horn," he said. "He rides the territory circuit. He's got a reputation for not being anyone's friend when it comes to land fraud." A pause. "He's due through in about 3 weeks." Clara nodded slowly. "Then we have 3 weeks," she said, "to finish the evidence, to write to Austin and get the company registration confirmation back, to talk to every rancher along that creek and make sure they're ready." "And Briggs," Luke said. "Briggs," Clara said, "is going to keep thinking he's 2 steps ahead of everyone." She looked at him steadily. "He won't know we've already passed him." Luke nodded, stood up, began gathering the papers from the table with a careful, deliberate movement that had nothing to do with tidiness and everything to do with needing to do something with his hands. "I'll drive you back to town," he said. "Thank you," Clara said. She gathered her satchel, picked up her notebook, paused at the table for a moment, looking at the wildflowers in the jar on the counter, more brown than not now, hanging past their time. She didn't say anything about them, but she didn't look away from them either for just a moment before she followed Luke to the door. The letter from Austin arrived on a Wednesday 11 days after they sent it. Luke was in the yard when Tommy Reese came riding up with it, and something about the boy's pace faster than a routine delivery made Luke set down his tools before Tommy even called out. He took the envelope, turned it over once, and walked directly inside where Clara was working at the kitchen table. He set it in front of her without a word. She opened it without ceremony. She read it once through fast. Then she read it again slowly, the way she read everything important twice because the second reading was where the details lived. Then she set the letter flat on the table and put both hands on top of it and looked at Luke. "Briggs Development Associates," she said. "No company by that name or registration number has ever been legally chartered in the state of Texas." Luke pulled out a chair and sat down. "The sequential numbers we identified," Clara continued, "belong to a block that was applied for and denied, in 1887 denied, because the applicant failed to complete the charter documentation. The block was never reissued, which means whoever used those numbers knew they existed in the registry and knew they had never been formally tied to a real company." She paused. "This wasn't an accident or a shortcut. Someone deliberately found dead registration numbers and used them because they would survive a casual check but collapse under a formal one." "Meaning someone with access to the state registry records," Luke said. "Or someone who paid for that access," Clara said. She stood up and went to the corner of the kitchen where her satchel lived. Now it had stopped being a guest's bag and started being simply where it lived, and pulled out the file she had been building for 10 days. Contracts, payment receipts, the notes from Hank and May and Pete Sorensen, the county registry entries, her own written summaries of the patterns. She laid them across the table in the order she had established, and then she placed the Austin letter at the top of the sequence. "This is the keystone," she said. "Everything else describes the crime. This proves the instrument of the crime didn't legally exist. Any contract signed with Briggs Development Associates is a contract signed with a fiction." She looked at Luke. "Every default clause, every pending development notation, every land claim they plan to file, all of it rests on a foundation that doesn't exist." Luke stared at the documents. "Then it's over," he said. "They can't file a valid claim." "They can't file a valid claim if a judge sees all of this," Clara said carefully. "But they don't know we have it. And a man like Briggs, when he feels the ground shifting, he doesn't stop. He accelerates." She was right. They found out how right she was the very next morning. Hank Delaney showed up before breakfast, which meant something was wrong, because Hank Delaney did not make social calls, and he especially did not make them before the sun had finished deciding what it was doing. He tied his horse at the post and came through the door with his hat in his hand and his jaw tight and said without preamble, "I got a notice yesterday evening. County office. Land contest filing against my south pasture." Clara was at the table before he finished the sentence. "Let me see it." He handed it over. She read it standing up, and as she read, Luke watched her face, watched the careful, controlled expression do something it hadn't done before in his presence. It tightened, not with panic, with anger. "They filed early," she said. "What does that mean?" Hank said. "It means someone told them we were asking questions." She set the notice on the table. "This filing is dated 4 days ago, before the Austin letter arrived, but the timing—" She stopped, picked the notice back up, read the bottom section again. "The filing officer is listed as Wendell Cole." Hank said a word that would have embarrassed him in church. "He filed his own name on it," Luke said. "Is that legal?" "It's not illegal if no one challenges it," Clara said. "And it wouldn't be challenged in normal circumstances because Cole is the county officer. He processes filings, he doesn't usually appear on them as a party. But if the land company needed a filing officer and their usual mechanism was compromised..." She thought for a moment. He panicked, or Briggs panicked. Something changed in the last week and they decided to move before they were ready. Luke thought about the post office, about Harlan Briggs crossing the street, about the fact that Sunset Ridge was a small town, and he had been seen with Clara 3 times in 2 weeks, visiting neighboring ranches and small towns, did not fail to notice things. "Someone saw us," he said. Clara looked at him. "Yes," she said. "Someone saw us and told Briggs." The question of who had seen them and talked was one they did not have time for right now, and all 3 of them understood that without saying it. Hank sat down. Clara paced the length of the kitchen, once the only time Luke had seen her pace, and then she stopped and stood very still. And he could almost see the gears turning the rapid-fire assessment of what this changed and what it didn't. "The filing against Hank's south pasture is first," she said, "which means the others are coming. Days, not weeks. They'll file sequentially, probably all through Cole trying to get everything in the county record before anyone can respond." She turned to Luke. "How long does a landowner have to contest a filing?" 30 days from notice, Luke said. "Usually. 30 days is enough," Clara said, "if we use every hour of it." She picked up her pen. "Hank, I need you to ride to Pete Sorensen and May Garrett today. Tell them both what's happened. Tell them to bring every document Briggs ever gave them to Luke's ranch by tomorrow morning. Tell them not to talk to anyone from the county office in the meantime. Anyone." She paused. "Tell May specifically if Wendell Cole or anyone from his office contacts her, she is to say she needs time to consult a family member before signing anything. That buys us hours." Hank was already standing. "What are you going to do?" "Write a complaint to the territorial court," Clara said. "Addressed to Judge Elias Horn." She was already reaching for paper. "A county officer who appears as a filing party in a land contest is in direct conflict with his official duties. That alone is grounds for territorial oversight. And if Judge Horn sees this filing alongside the fraudulent company registration—" She looked up. "He'll want to come sooner than his scheduled circuit." "How much sooner?" Luke said. "That depends on how clearly I write this," Clara said. And she sat down and began. She wrote for 4 hours. Luke did not interrupt her. He made coffee, checked on the stock, repaired the hinge on the barn door that had been threatening to fail for a month, and came back inside every hour to find her in the same position. Pen moving, face concentrated, occasionally stopping to reread a paragraph with the critical expression of someone who knew the difference between language that worked and language that almost worked. What she produced was not a letter. It was an argument, methodical, documented, and precise. It named Wendell Cole by title and action. It cited the fraudulent Briggs development registration by number, with the Austin letter as corroborating evidence. It described the pattern across 6 properties with specific dates, amounts, and documentation. It named the pending development notations filed without landowner notification as a potential violation of Territorial Land Code. Section 9, Paragraph 3. She had found the code reference in a slim volume of territorial statutes Luke hadn't known he owned, inherited from the previous owner of the ranch, and sitting on a shelf unread for years. When she finished, she handed it to Luke without comment. He read it. He read it again. "Where did you learn to write like this?" he said. "I learned by reading documents until I understood what made some of them matter and some of them not," she said. "The ones that matter are specific. They give a judge or a reviewer nothing to dismiss and nothing to misunderstand." She looked at him. "I'm not a lawyer. A real lawyer would do this better. But we don't have a lawyer, and we have 3 days before they start filing against the other properties. This is what we have." "It's enough," Luke said. He meant it. They sent it by express post priority delivery, addressed directly to Judge Elias Horn, in care of the Territorial Courthouse. Clara paid the extra postage herself from money she had not mentioned she had, and when Luke looked at her about it, she said simply, "I have savings. I wasn't spending them on anything." And that was the end of that. The next morning, May Garrett arrived with Pete Sorensen, both of them carrying their document boxes. Both of them with the tight expressions of people who had not slept well. Pete Sorensen was a quiet man in his mid-40s who had built his ranch from nothing in 12 years, and whose quietness, now sitting at Luke's kitchen table, had a specific quality, the quietness of a man who is holding his anger in one hand and his fear in the other, and doesn't want to drop either one. "My east pasture," he said. "They filed on my east pasture." He put his notice on the table beside Hank's. "Got it yesterday afternoon." May put hers down beside his. "My entire south boundary," she said. Her voice was steady. "Every inch of it. 3 filings in 3 days. moving exactly as Clara had predicted. She spread the notices in a row and compared them, reading quickly. "Same filing officer on all three," she said. "Cole, same company name, same default language." She pointed to the bottom of Pete's notice. "Different attorney of record, though." She looked up. The first two had no attorney listed. Pete's has an attorney, Thaddeus R. Morrow Galveston. The name sat on the table. Luke said slowly, "A Galveston attorney, which is where Briggs would have gone to find legal architecture for this kind of scheme," Clara said. "Galveston is the money. The shipping, the land investment, the law firms that handle complex property arrangements. If there's a third party behind Briggs, the financier, the one who drew up the contracts, they're almost certainly in Galveston." May looked at her. "You think someone in Galveston is running this?" "I think someone in Galveston designed it," Clara said. "And I think Thaddeus R. Morrow might be the man who designed it." She paused. "Or the man who knows who did." Pete Sorensen's quiet broke just slightly. "How do we fight a Galveston attorney from Sunset Ridge, Texas?" "The same way we fight everything else," Clara said, "with better evidence." She looked around the table. Pete, May, Hank, Luke. 4 people who had come to this ranch because they had nowhere else to bring this. The attorney being named changes things. It means Briggs and whoever is behind him have decided to go fully legal. They think their documents are strong enough to survive a court challenge. They're wrong, but they don't know they're wrong yet. She spread her hands over the documents. What we have is stronger. A fraudulent company registration, a county officer in conflict of interest, 6 contracts with identical fraudulent clauses, and a pattern of pending notations filed without landowner knowledge. Any one of those things is a problem for their case. Together, they are the case. May Garrett put her hands flat on the table. "Tell me what you need me to do." It was the moment Luke would think about it later, the way certain moments become the ones you return to, that the thing shifted from Clara and Luke's investigation into something larger. When May Garrett put her hands on the table and asked what she needed to do, Pete Sorensen straightened in his chair. Hank Delaney nodded, once the firm nod of a man who has made a decision. And Clara, who had come to Sunset Ridge on a train with a dead sister's promise and a return ticket she had not used, looked at these 4 people around the table and understood that she was not operating alone anymore. She had not been alone for several days, actually. She had just not let herself notice it until now. "I need each of you to write out a statement," she said. "In your own words. When Briggs first approached you, what he said, what he promised, what you signed, and when. Date it and sign it. Don't change the language to sound official. Write it how you'd say it to a neighbor. Judges trust plain language from plain people." She paused. "And I need anyone else along this creek who got a visit from Briggs. Anyone who was approached but didn't sign, anyone who heard about the railroad project but was suspicious those voices matter too. A scheme this wide doesn't approach only the people it succeeds with. It approaches everyone and takes what it can." Hank said, "Tom Birch. 2 properties east of Pete's. Briggs came to him back in November, and Tom told him to get off his land. Tom's got a temper." "Tom's temper is an asset right now," Clara said. "Bring him." By the end of that day, Luke's kitchen table had become the center of something none of them had planned. 7 people had moved through the ranchers, a farmhand, who had overheard a conversation between Briggs and Cole at the feed store 6 months ago, and hadn't known what to make of it. A woman named Grace Ellison, whose late husband had been approached about selling his property to Briggs Development 2 years before the scheme apparently began. Grace Ellison, who was 63 years old and had driven herself 8 miles in a wagon, because Hank Delaney had told her what was happening, sat at Luke's table and said with perfect clarity, "My husband said it smelled like a confidence scheme. He died before he could prove it. I've been waiting 2 years for someone to prove it." Clara looked at her for a moment. "It's going to be proven," she said. "I promise you that." It was the only promise Clara had made since she arrived. Luke noticed because he noticed everything she did or didn't do, a habit he had developed without deciding, to the same way he had developed the habit of making 2 cups of coffee in the morning instead of 1. That night, late after everyone had gone, Luke came into the kitchen to find Clara staring at a piece of paper with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not the concentrated working look, not the controlled anger from Hank's filing. Something quieter, something that was costing her more. "What is it?" he said. She turned the paper toward him. It was not part of the fraud evidence. It was a personal letter, the handwriting unfamiliar, addressed to Clara in care of the Sunset Ridge post office. Tommy Reese had brought it with the other mail that afternoon, and she had apparently set it aside until now. "It's from a woman named Helen Morrow," Clara said. Luke looked at her. "Morrow, same name as the attorney." "His wife," Clara said. "Or his former wife. The letter is—" She paused. "She's in Galveston. She says she saw a notice in the territorial newspaper about land contest filings in Sunset Ridge County. She says her husband has been involved in land schemes in 3 other territories over the past 8 years. She says she tried to report him twice, and no one listened." Clara looked up. "She says she has documents." Luke sat down very slowly. "She found us," he said. "She found the filing notices," Clara said. "Public record. She's been watching for her husband's name in legal filings for 2 years, waiting for someone to build a case large enough to include what she knows." Clara set the letter down. "She wants to know if we're that case." The lamp between them held steady. Luke looked at the letter, looked at Clara. "Write to her tonight," he said. "I already started," Clara said. She had. He could see at the beginning of a reply on the paper beside the letter, her handwriting tight and clear and urgent. He pulled his chair around to her side of the table without being asked, because 2 sets of eyes on a letter this important were better than one, and she moved her lamp slightly to give him better light, and they worked on the reply together, in a silence that had nothing awkward left in it. The letter to Helen Morrow went out with the Morning Post. What came back 5 days later was not just a letter, it was a packet. Thick, sealed with wax, the handwriting on the outside shaking slightly. The handwriting of a person who had been afraid for a long time and had decided to stop being afraid. Inside were copies of 3 contracts from 2 different territories, all using the same false registration number structure. A ledger page showing payments flowing from Briggs Development to a holding account managed by Thaddeus R. Morrow's law firm. A personal letter from Morrow to an unnamed investor. Helen had written in the margin, "The investor is a man named Caldwell Land Speculator." Denver describing the Sunset Ridge operation as the largest of the series, and estimating the total land value at acquisition as sufficient to retire the Colorado debt entirely. Clara read the packet at the kitchen table with Luke beside her, and the morning going on outside without them. When she finished, she set it down and said nothing for almost a full minute. Then she said, "This is bigger than Sunset Ridge." "How much bigger?" Luke said. 3 territories, Clara said. "At minimum. The same scheme, the same structure scaled up each time. Sunset Ridge is the culmination, the largest version. They've been practicing." She looked at him. "Caldwell, the Denver investor, is the third party, the money behind all of it. Morrow is the legal architect. Briggs is the field operator. Cole is the local mechanism." She spread Helen Morrow's documents beside their own. "This is not a county land fraud. This is a territorial crime, possibly a federal one." Luke stared at the documents. "Judge Horn," he said. "Judge Horn needs to see all of this," Clara said. "Every piece, ours and Helen's, because this is no longer a case about 6 ranchers in Sunset Ridge County." She paused. "This is a case about a coordinated conspiracy operating across multiple territories, using fraudulent company registrations, corrupt local officials, and legal manipulation to strip land from isolated property owners who had no reason to suspect they'd been selected as targets." She looked at him directly. "That's a federal matter. Judge Horn can refer it upward, but he has to see it first." "Have we heard back from him?" Luke said. "Not yet," Clara said. "But we will." She said it with the certainty of someone who believed in the logic of things, that evidence this clear presented this carefully to a judge with this reputation, would produce a response. It was not naive certainty. It was the certainty of someone who had done the work and knew the work was good. 2 days later, a rider came from the territorial courthouse. Judge Elias Horn would arrive in Sunset Ridge in 8 days. Not on his regular circuit schedule, specifically for this matter. Luke read the notification twice, standing in the yard where the rider had handed it to him, and then walked inside and put it on the table in front of Clara without a word. She read it, set it down, looked at her hands for a moment. 8 days, she said. 8 days, Luke said. She looked up at him, and for the first time since she had stepped off the train with her broken clasped carpetbag and her dead sister's promise and her carefully managed expression, something in Clara Harper's face went unguarded. Not for long, just long enough. "We have a lot of work left," she said. "We have 8 days," Luke said. "It's enough." She held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then she picked up her pen. But that night, something went wrong that none of their evidence or preparation had accounted for. Luke went to the barn at 10 o'clock for the last check of the evening. The habit of years, and when he came back to the house, the front door was standing open in a way he had not left it. He went still on the porch. He went inside carefully. The kitchen table was undisturbed. The documents were where Clara had left them. Nothing appeared moved or missing except the Austin letter. The letter confirming Briggs Development Associates had never legally existed. The keystone of the entire case. It was gone. Luke checked every surface. Checked the floor. Checked the file Clara had built. He was absolutely certain where she kept it. She had a precise system, and the Austin letter lived on top first document in the sequence, because it was the foundation everything else rested on. It was not there. He stood in the kitchen with his heart going fast and his mind going faster, and then he heard hoofbeats. Someone moving hard, moving away from the ranch in the direction of town, and by the time he got to the door, there was nothing to see. He sent Tommy Reese for Clara within the hour. She came in fast, still buttoning her coat, and he told her without cushioning it. She went straight to the table, went through the file with the rapid systematic check of someone who knew exactly where everything lived, and when she straightened up, her face was controlled in that way that meant the thing underneath was not. "They were in this house," she said. "Yes," Luke said. "They know what we have," she said. "Or they think they know. They took the Austin letter because it's the one piece they can't replicate or counter. It's a government record that proves their company never existed." She paused. "Without it, the contracts still look fraudulent, but a clever lawyer can argue irregular paperwork instead of deliberate fraud. It narrows our case." "Can we get another copy from Austin?" Luke said. In 8 days, she was already calculating. "By express, if we send tonight, possibly. But Briggs will know we're trying, and he may find a way to interfere with the response." She looked at him. "Do you have a copy of anything you sent them? Any drafts?" Luke went to the back room, came back with nothing useful. Clara stood at the table. She was thinking hard and fast, and he could almost see the structure of it, the way she moved through possibilities and eliminated them, the way she had been doing since she first spread his documents across this table 10 days ago. "I have my notes from when I first read it," she said. "The registration number, the denial date, the specific language of the denial." She went to her notebook. It lived in her satchel, never on the table, the one document she never left unsecured, and opened it. "I wrote it all down verbatim. I always write primary source material verbatim." She found the page, showed it to him. "It's not the original letter, but it is a contemporaneous record created by an independent party, me, at the time of first review. A judge can consider it corroborating evidence, even without the original." "Is that enough?" Luke said. "It might not have been before tonight," Clara said, "but tonight changed the equation." She looked at him steadily. "Someone broke into your home and stole a legal document to interfere with an active case before Judge Horn. That is obstruction. And if we can prove who did it—" She paused. "Cole, or Briggs, or someone acting for them." Luke's jaw tightened. How do we prove it? We start by finding out who in this town knew the Austin letter existed, Clara said. You and I knew. Hank, Pete, May, they knew we wrote to Austin, but not what came back. Tommy Reese delivered it. She paused. Tommy. Luke was already moving. They found Tommy Reese at his family's place asleep, and the boy came to the door confused and frightened and completely transparent in the way of someone who has done something wrong and been dreading this exact moment. He was 17 years old, and he cracked under Luke's quiet, steady questioning in under 5 minutes. He hadn't told Briggs. He had told his older brother Carl, who worked at the feed store, who had told someone else who the chain didn't matter. What mattered was that by the time Luke sat the boy down and asked him to tell it all from the beginning, Carl Reese's name emerged with a specific detail. Carl had spoken to Wendell Cole at the feed store 3 days ago, and Cole had been very interested in what the express delivery to the Callahan Ranch had contained. Tommy was crying by the end. Luke sent him home with a firm instruction to tell no one what they had discussed. In the wagon driving back, Clara said, Cole. Cole, Luke confirmed. He'll have given the letter to Briggs or Morrow, or destroyed it himself. She was quiet for a moment. We have to assume the letter is gone. We work with what we have. She looked out at the dark. But we have Tommy. And we have what Tommy heard. And Cole walking into a courtroom in 8 days with Judge Horn presiding, knowing that we know what he did tonight. She paused. He doesn't know that we know. That's still our advantage. Luke drove in silence for a moment. You're not afraid, he said. Not accusatory, just an observation. Clara was quiet for a beat. I'm afraid, she said. I'm afraid every hour. I'm just more afraid of what happens if we stop than what happens if we keep going. Luke looked at her in the dark of the wagon. She was looking straight ahead, chin level, hands steady in her lap. Evelyn would have been afraid too, he said quietly. She told me that in a letter. She said the thing she was most afraid of in her life was running out of time to do the things that mattered. He paused. Letter 12. October. Clara turned her head and looked at him. He could not see her expression fully in the dark, but he could feel the weight of it. I wrote that letter, she said softly. The whole thing. She was having a very bad night. I wrote it and read it back to her, and she said... Clara's voice held steady through what it cost her. She said, that's exactly right. Send it exactly like that. The wagon moved through the dark toward the ranch. Then it was both of you, Luke said. Clara did not answer for a moment. When she did, her voice was quieter than usual. Yes, she said. I suppose it was. They had 8 days before Judge Horn arrived, and a case that was still strong, still real, still built on more truth than Briggs and Cole and Thaddeus Morrow had anticipated anyone finding. They had Helen Morrow's documents from Galveston. They had the statements from 6 ranchers. They had a missing letter that would itself become evidence of desperation. What they did not have, not yet, not fully, was the last piece Clara had been circling for days without saying it aloud. She said it that night, sitting at the kitchen table with the lamp burning and the documents arranged and the notebook open. I need to talk to Wendell Cole, she said. Luke looked up. Not to confront him, she said. Not yet. I need to see his face when he doesn't know I know what he did tonight. I need to understand how confident he still is. She paused. Because if Cole is confident, it means there's something else. Something we haven't found yet. A piece of this we're missing. She looked at Luke. Confident men who have just stolen a document to protect their scheme are not usually confident. They're frightened and they move fast. Cole has been steady this whole time. That means he has something he thinks we can't touch. Luke was quiet. Then we find out what it is, he said. Clara looked at him across the lamp. Yes, she said. We do. Clara walked into Wendell Cole's office the next morning at 9 o'clock alone without telling Luke she was going until she was already in the wagon. She had left a note. 3 sentences. Going to see Cole. Don't follow me in. Wait outside if you want, but stay out of the building. She had weighed every word of it the way she weighed every word of everything, and she had left it on the kitchen table next to his coffee cup, where he would find it the moment he came inside from the morning chores. She knew he would not be happy. She also knew he would respect the decision, because in 3 weeks of working beside this man, she had learned that Luke Callahan's deepest quality was that he trusted people who had earned it, and she had earned it, and he would stand outside and wait and hate every minute of it. She was counting on exactly that. Cole's office was in the county building on the east side of Main Street, a solid brick structure that announced itself as official, with the particular confidence of a building that has never had reason to be ashamed of what happens inside it. Clara had that thought deliberately as she pushed open the door. The building didn't know. Buildings never did. Wendell Cole was at his desk. He was a man of about 50, with the neat appearance of someone who understood that authority was partly costumed, and he looked up when she entered with the polite blankness of a county official encountering a stranger. "Good morning," he said. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," Clara said pleasantly. "My name is Clara Harper. I'm assisting Luke Callahan with some property record questions. I understand you're the officer who handles the county land registry." Something moved through Cole's expression. It was fast, very fast, and a less attentive person would have missed it entirely. But Clara had spent the wagon ride deciding exactly which words to use in exactly which order to produce exactly this moment. And she saw it, the flicker of recognition, of calculation, of a man rapidly deciding what he knew and what he should pretend not to know. "That's right," he said. His voice stayed even. "What kind of questions?" "Record verification mostly," Clara said. She sat down across from his desk without being invited. Not aggressively, just with the calm of someone who belonged in the chair. "Mr. Callahan has some concerns about the accuracy of the pending development notations on his property. He'd like to understand when those were filed and by whom." Cole folded his hands on his desk. "Those notations are a matter of public record. Anyone can review them." "Of course," Clara said. "I've already reviewed them. What I'm trying to clarify is the procedural accuracy of the filing. The Code for Pending Development Notations, Territorial Land Code Section 9, Paragraph 3, requires written notification to the property owner within 30 days of filing." She paused. Mr. Callahan never received written notification, nor did his neighbors. She tilted her head slightly. "Is there perhaps a backlog in the notification process?" Cole looked at her for a long moment. He was good. She would give him that. The face stayed composed. The hands stayed still. The eyes stayed professionally neutral. A man who had been doing this for years, managing information, managing appearances, managing the careful distance between what was true and what was recorded. "Notifications can sometimes be delayed in the processing queue," he said carefully. "I'd have to review the specific files." "I'd appreciate that," Clara said, and she smiled at him, the pleasant, slightly deferential smile of a woman who is asking for help and not threatening anything, and watched his shoulders drop by exactly the margin of a man who has decided he is in control of this conversation. She stood. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Cole. I'll let Mr. Callahan know you're looking into it." She walked out. She did not look back. Luke was across the street leaning against the wagon with his arms crossed and his hat pulled low, and when she climbed up, he said nothing until she had the reins and they were moving. Then he said, "Well, he's not confident," Clara said. "He's performing confidence. There's a difference." She kept her eyes on the road. "He knows we're building something. He doesn't know how much we have, but he's not sleeping well and his hands moved twice when he thought I wasn't watching them. What does that tell you?" "That whatever he thinks he has, the thing that's been keeping him steady, it's not as solid as it was," she said. "He's frightened, which means he's going to do something in the next 48 hours. She glanced at Luke. "We need to be ready for what that something is." What Cole did was not what either of them expected. He did not run. He did not destroy documents. He did not contact Briggs, or if he did, the contact produced no visible action. What Wendell Cole did 36 hours after Clara sat across his desk and smiled at him was go to see May Garrett. May sent her farmhand a boy of about 15 named Eli, riding hard to Luke's ranch with a message that came out breathless and urgent. And exactly right, Cole had shown up at May's place alone, no Briggs, no lawyer, and he had asked to speak with her privately. May had said she needed a family member present. Cole had said he would come back in the morning. He was coming back at 8 o'clock. Clara read the message twice. Then she looked at Luke. He's going to offer her something, she said. A settlement, or a withdrawal of the filing against her property in exchange for her silence about the others. She stood up. He's trying to fracture us, separate one rancher from the group, and offer them something individually that makes them unwilling to testify collectively. May wouldn't take it, Luke said. May wouldn't, Clara agreed. But Cole doesn't know May the way we do. He sees a widow working alone and he thinks isolated means vulnerable. She was already gathering her coat. We need to be at May's place at 7:30 tomorrow morning. All of us, Luke said. All of us, Clara said. They were 6 people in May Garrett's kitchen at 7:30 the next morning. Luke, Clara, Hank Delaney, Pete Sorensen, May herself, and Tom Birch, who had driven over from his place in the dark, because Hank had told him, and Tom Birch's particular form of anger at Harlan Briggs made him extraordinarily reliable about showing up, when showing up mattered. They drank May's coffee, and they waited. Cole arrived at 8:05. He knocked. May opened the door. He stepped inside and stopped walking when he saw the room. 6 people looked back at him. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. 4 seconds in which Wendell Cole's face went through a complete and involuntary performance of everything he had been managing for months. The calculation, the confidence, the performance of both, and came out the other side as something rawer and less controlled. Then he put the performance back on. But they had all seen underneath it, and they all knew it, and so did he. I came to speak with Mrs. Garrett privately, he said. Mrs. Garrett's family and neighbors are here, Clara said from her place at the table. As is entirely her right under any circumstance. Please sit down, Mr. Cole. He did not sit. Miss Harper, he said. He had done his research on her name, which told Clara something. I'm not sure what you think you're... I think I'm sitting in a neighbor's kitchen, Clara said. What are you doing here, Mr. Cole? The room was very quiet. Tom Birch, who had been holding himself carefully still in the corner, made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. Cole looked around the room, looked back at Clara. Something in his face settled not into calm, but into the particular expression of a man who has just finished calculating and doesn't like the number he came up with. The filing against Mrs. Garrett's property, he said. There may have been a procedural error. I came to discuss correction. Discuss it here, May said. These people are my witnesses. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Mrs. Garrett. I said here, May said. 61 years old alone since her husband died, and her voice had the quality of a woman who has stopped asking for things and started stating them. Whatever you have to say, you say it in front of these people, or you leave. Cole left. He walked out of May Garrett's kitchen without another word, and they heard his horse moving away fast, and then the kitchen let out a breath it had been holding collectively. Pete Sorensen said, He's going to Briggs. Yes, Clara said. She was already standing. Which means Briggs is going to move. Today possibly. Definitely before Judge Horn arrives. She looked at Luke. We need to get everything we have to the territorial court clerk today. Not in 8 days. Today. If Briggs files something new before we get our evidence into the court record, he controls the sequence. Luke was already at the door. They drove back to the ranch at a pace that was faster than sensible Clara, holding her satchel on her lap and her notebook open, reviewing the evidence sequence in her head. The filing to the territorial court had to be complete. Every document, every statement. Helen Morrow's packet. Clara's verbatim notes from the stolen Austin letter. The records of the break-in Tommy Reese's account of Cole's interest in the express delivery. All of it organized and indexed and presented as a coherent case, not a collection of complaints. She had been building toward this for 2 weeks. The architecture was ready. It was the execution that had to be perfect. They spent the rest of that day and most of the night on it. Luke wrote out his own statement in full, not the abbreviated version he'd drafted before, but the complete account from the day Harlan Briggs first came to his ranch to the morning he found the Austin letter missing from his kitchen. He wrote it in his own voice, exactly as May had written hers, exactly as Hank and Pete and Tom Birch had written theirs, plain language, specific details, signed and dated. Clara read each statement as it was finished and made one or two precise suggestions and left the rest alone. She understood that a judge reading 7 different voices describing the same scheme from 7 different angles was more powerful than 7 polished documents that sounded like they came from the same pen. Helen Morrow's packet she organized last, because it was the element that transformed the case from a local fraud to something larger, and she wanted it to land on the judge's desk in that sequence. Local first, territorial second, the scope revealed gradually, so that by the time the Galveston connection emerged, the pattern was already established. At 2 in the morning, she wrote the cover letter. Luke stayed up with her. He did not ask to help with the writing. He had learned which parts were his and which were hers. But he sat across the table and kept the lamp trimmed and pushed a plate toward her at midnight that she ate without comment, and he took back when she was done. At one point, somewhere in the second hour, he said quietly, "What happens after?" She looked up from the letter. "After the hearing, after all of it," he said. "After Horn comes and sees the evidence and rules on the filings, after Briggs and Cole and Morrow face whatever they face." He paused. "What happens to you?" Clara looked at him steadily. "I hadn't decided yet," she said. "Galveston," he said. "You had a life there." "I had a position there," she said. "And a sister. The position is gone because I left it. The sister is gone because—" She stopped. "Galveston is a city I lived in. That's different from a life." Luke was quiet for a moment. "You could stay," he said. He said it the way he had said most of the important things between them, without drama, without performance, just as a fact being placed on the table for consideration. Clara looked at the letter in front of her, then at him. "Ask me again after the hearing," she said. He nodded once. "All right," he said. She went back to the letter. He trimmed the lamp. The complete filing went to the territorial court clerk by express rider the next morning, everything bound and indexed and accompanied by a cover letter that Clara had drafted with the precision of someone who understood that the first document a judge reads determines how he reads everything that follows. Luke watched the rider take it and held himself very still until the man was out of sight. "It's done," Clara said beside him. "Part of it," he said. "The most important part," she said. "The rest is waiting and being ready." The waiting lasted 4 days. On the second day, Harlan Briggs came to the ranch. Luke was in the yard when the man rode up, and he had time to make a single decision. He had told Clara, and he stood by it. He would not show what he knew. He would be the same Luke Callahan that Briggs had been managing for 8 months, the rancher who signed the contract and made his payments and didn't ask complicated questions. Briggs dismounted with his characteristic ease. He was wearing his good coat and his expression of pleasant authority, the one that had probably worked on a dozen isolated property owners across 3 territories. "Luke," he said, "hope I'm not interrupting." "Harlan," Luke said, "what brings you out?" "Just a check-in," Briggs said. He was scanning the yard with his eyes while his face stayed friendly, looking for something, looking for evidence of something he'd heard or suspected. "Wanted to make sure everything's in order before the next payment window." "Everything's fine," Luke said. "I heard you've had some visitors lately," Briggs said, casual, conversational. "Neighbors coming and going." "It's a neighborly town," Luke said. Briggs smiled. "It is." He paused. "I also heard you had a woman staying out here. Someone from out of town." "My fiancé's sister," Luke said. The word came out of him without planning fiancé, and he heard it as it landed and did not take it back. Briggs looked at him for a moment. "Didn't know you were engaged?" "It's recent," Luke said. Briggs nodded slowly. His eyes moved to the house. "She around?" "She's in town," Luke said. "Anything you need to tell me about the development project, Harlan, you can tell me directly." Briggs brought his gaze back to Luke. Something shifted in the easy manner just slightly, just enough. "No," he said. "No, everything's on track. Railroad survey team is." "There is no railroad survey team," Luke said. The yard went quiet. Briggs went still. The pleasant authority dropped off his face like something that had only been resting there and never belonged. "Excuse me," he said. "There's no railroad," Luke said. "There's no survey. There's no Briggs Development Associates registered anywhere in the state of Texas. Because I checked, and the registration numbers you used on your contracts belong to a block that was denied in 1887 and never legally issued." He looked at the man steadily. "I'm telling you this because I want you to know that I know. Not because it changes anything that's coming. It doesn't." Harlan Briggs looked at him for a long moment. The calculation was visible now, stripped of the charm, just the raw arithmetic of a man deciding whether to bluff or fold. He did neither. He turned, mounted his horse, and rode out without another word. Luke watched him go. Clara came around the side of the house 30 seconds later. She had been there the whole time. "You were supposed to be in town," Luke said. "I was never going to town," she said. "I wanted to see his face." She paused. "He's going tomorrow. Today by telegraph if he can. The operation in Sunset Ridge is compromised, and he knows it, and he'll want instruction on whether to cut and run or try to salvage." "And Morrow," Luke said. "Morrow is a lawyer," Clara said. "He'll tell Briggs to hold position. Don't run running looks guilty. He'll try to find a legal angle to survive the hearing." She paused. "Which means everything depends on the next 4 days and what happens when Judge Horn sits down." "You called yourself my fiancé," Luke said. Clara looked at him. "I heard," she said. "I was 10 feet away." "I didn't plan that. I know you didn't." She met his eyes. "It worked, though. Briggs will tell Morrow there's a woman involved, and Morrow will think personal complications, distraction, a fiancé who doesn't understand the legal implications. He'll underestimate." She held Luke's gaze. "They always underestimate." She went back inside before he could say anything else. He stood in the yard for a moment, and then he went inside too. On the 4th day, Judge Elias Horn arrived. He was not what the town expected Sunset Ridge had collectively imagined. A large man, perhaps someone with the physical authority of his judicial reputation. What came off the stage was a slight man of about 60, with sharp gray eyes and a worn leather satchel, and the economical movements of someone who had spent 40 years deciding what mattered and discarding everything that didn't. He had read their filing. He made that clear in the first 2 minutes of the meeting he called in the county building's main room, which was both Cole's working space and the only room in Sunset Ridge large enough to hold what needed to happen. He had read all of it, the contracts, the statements, Helen Morrow's packet, Clara's notes from the stolen Austin letter with her explanation of its theft, and he had questions. He asked them in the precise order of someone who had identified the sequence of the argument and wanted to follow it cleanly. He asked Luke about the initial contract. He asked Hank about the sequential registration numbers. He asked May about Cole's visit and her specific account of his words. He asked Pete Sorensen about the pending notation on his property and when he had first learned of it. Then he looked at Clara. "You organized this," he said. It was not a question. "I identified the pattern," Clara said. "The ranchers built the case. I helped structure it." "What is your professional background, Miss Harper?" "Accounts and records," she said. "Shipping documentation. I spent 5 years ensuring that what was recorded matched what was real." Horn looked at her for a moment. "And in your assessment," he said, "what is the fraudulent registration of Briggs Development Associates specifically designed to accomplish? To create an unenforceable contract that appears enforceable on first review," Clara said. "The false registration gives the contract the surface appearance of legitimacy. The default clauses give the company grounds to file land claims. The county filing done through an officer with a conflict of interest creates a paper trail in official records that a busy judge with a large circuit docket might not examine closely." She paused. The entire scheme relies on the targets not knowing what to look for and the reviewing officials not looking closely. It is specifically designed to survive casual scrutiny and collapse only under detailed examination. Horn was quiet for a moment. "Which you provided," he said. "Which I provided," Clara said. Cole was present. He had been required to attend as the county officer of record. He sat at a table to the left, and as the hearing progressed, as Judge Horn moved through the evidence with the systematic thoroughness of a man who had seen fraud before and was not surprised by any of it. Cole's composure eroded in the specific way that composure erodes when a person realizes that the ground they believed was solid is not solid at all. When Horn asked him directly about the pending development notations, why they were filed without landowner notification in violation of territorial code. Section 9, Paragraph 3. Cole said there had been a procedural oversight. Horn looked at him for a long moment. 7 consecutive oversights, he said. All on Thursdays. All in the same fiscal quarter. All involving properties with documented financial pressures visible in county records you personally administered. He paused. That is not an oversight, Mr. Cole. That is a pattern. Cole said nothing. The filing against Mr. Delaney's South Pasture, Horn continued. You appear as filing officer, which places you in direct conflict with your role as county records administrator. Can you explain under what authority you filed in your own name? Cole's attorney, a man from Amarillo, who had arrived that morning looking calm and was now looking considerably less calm, started to speak. Horn raised one hand without looking at him, and the attorney stopped. Mr. Cole, Horn said, I'm asking you. Cole looked at the table. I acted on advice of counsel, he said. Whose counsel? The pause before Cole answered was 4 seconds long, and in those 4 seconds, the room held its breath. Thaddeus Morrow, Cole said. Of Galveston. Clara did not look at Luke. She looked at Horn. Horn wrote something down. Then he looked up at the room and said, I'm placing a temporary stay on all land contest filings associated with Briggs Development Associates pending territorial review. The county land registry notations for all 6 properties are suspended pending investigation of proper notification procedures. He looked at Cole. Mr. Cole, you are suspended from your county duties pending the outcome of this review. You are not to access county records or office facilities until this matter is resolved. He paused. And I am referring the matter of Thaddeus R. Morrow's involvement in this scheme to the Territorial Attorney General's office, along with the evidence provided regarding operations in 2 additional territories. The room was completely still. Then May Garrett exhaled, just one breath long and slow and released from somewhere deep. Pete Sorensen put his face in his hands not from grief, but from the particular relief of a man who has been holding himself rigid for weeks and has just been told he can stop. Tom Birch said something under his breath that might have been a prayer or might have been a curse, and was probably both. Hank Delaney looked at Luke. Luke looked at Clara. She was looking at Judge Horn as he gathered his papers, watching him with the contained expression she always wore when something important was happening, the one that kept the inside from the outside. But her hands folded on the table in front of her had come slightly undone from their careful position. Fingers loosely interlaced, not gripped, not controlled, just resting. He had learned to read her hands. It had taken 3 weeks, and he was unreasonably proud of it. He reached across and put his hand over hers. Just briefly. Just enough. She turned her head and looked at him. She didn't move her hand. Horn finished with his papers and stood, and the room began to move again. People standing, voices overlapping. May reaching across to grip Pete's arm, Tom Birch heading toward the door with the walk of a man who needs air. Through all of it, Clara stayed seated for a moment longer than necessary, and Luke stayed with her, and the noise of the room broke around them like water around 2 stones. It's not over, she said, quiet just for him. The Attorney General review will take months. Cole might get a sympathetic examiner. Morrow has resources, and he'll fight it. I know, Luke said. The ranchers will have to provide more testimony. Possibly travel to the territorial capital. I know, Luke said. And Caldwell, the Denver investor, he's the furthest removed. He may never face consequences at all. Clara, Luke said. She stopped. I know, he said. All of it, I know. He looked at her. But today, right now, what happened in this room today? Give yourself that. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face shifted the careful management of it, the precise control the structure she maintained, and underneath it was something that had been there for weeks and had not been spoken or offered or made available. Something that had grown in the space between evidence and testimony, between late nights and cold coffee, and the particular trust of two people building something real together. Okay, she said quietly. Today. May Garrett appeared at Clara's elbow and put both arms around her without asking the embrace of a woman who had decided Clara Harper had earned it. And Clara went still for exactly 1 second, the second of a person who has not been held in a long time and has forgotten how. And then she held on. Luke stood and let them have the moment. Outside Sunset Ridge was exactly what it always was, the same street, the same feed store, the same dust on the same boards. But something had shifted in the weight of it, the way a room shifts when a window is opened that has been closed for a long time. Not dramatic, not loud, just different from the inside. Hank Delaney came to stand beside Luke on the steps. She's something, Hank said. Not with any particular inflection, just as a fact. Yes, Luke said. Evelyn Sender, Hank asked. He had heard enough of the story by now to ask the question, and he asked it simply the way plain-spoken men ask complicated things. Luke thought about that. About letter 12. About that's exactly right, send it exactly like that. About a woman who had spent her last months making sure the letters were honest and the promise was kept, and the man at the other end of the correspondence would not be left alone. Yeah, he said. I think she did. Hank nodded. Went down the steps toward his wagon. Turned back once. You going to ask her to stay? He said. Luke looked through the doorway at Clara still with May, talking now, the careful face gone, and something warmer in its place. Something that had been arriving gradually for 3 weeks, and had apparently fully arrived sometime this afternoon. Already did, he said. She told me to ask again after the hearing. Hank looked at him, looked at Clara, looked back. Well, he said, hearing's over. Hank Delaney's words followed Luke back inside like something he couldn't unhear. Hearing's over. He stood in the doorway of the county building and watched Clara finish her conversation with May, and he made himself wait, not because he was uncertain, but because he had learned in 3 weeks that Clara Harper did not respond well to being rushed toward anything. She moved at the speed of her own certainty, and her certainty once arrived was absolute. Rushing her before she got there accomplished nothing except making her dig in, so he waited. May finally released her, patting her hand twice with the firm affection of a woman who had decided Clara was family and was not asking permission about it. Clara turned and found Luke in the doorway and walked toward him with the expression that had replaced her careful management over the course of the afternoon. Something more open, more tired, more real. Hank says the hearing's over, Luke said. Clara looked at him. I heard him, she said. He's not wrong. No, she said. He's not. They stood in the doorway for a moment, the noise of the room behind her, and the street in front of him, and the last of the afternoon light coming in from the west. Stay, he said. Not will you, or I'd like you to, or any of the softer approaches he could have chosen. Just the word plain, the way he had said everything important between them. Clara looked at him for a long moment. He watched her face, watched the thing that had been arriving gradually finally finish arriving. I need to go back to Galveston first, she said. There are things to settle. Evelyn's belongings, the lease on the house. She paused. I need to close what's there before I can open what's here. How long? He said. 3 weeks, maybe 4. All right, he said. You're not going to argue, she said. No, he said. I'm going to be here when you come back. Clara looked at him with the full weight of everything they had been through in 4 weeks. The train platform, the kitchen table, the documents, the late nights, the stolen letter, the hearing, all of it. And she said quietly, "I know you will." It was the most she had said on the subject. It was enough. They drove back to the ranch in the early evening, and the silence between them was the best kind, the kind that didn't need filling, because everything necessary had already been said or was understood without saying. Luke unhitched the horse, and Clara went inside, and by the time he came in, she had coffee on which she had never done before. She always waited for him to make it. He didn't mention it. He just sat down and accepted the cup she put in front of him and drank it. "I need to tell you something," Clara said. She sat across from him with her own cup and looked at the table for a moment and then looked up. "I've been holding it for a few days because the timing was never right." Luke waited. "The evening Briggs came to the ranch," she said. "When you told him you knew the company was fraudulent." "Yes," he said. "You called me your fiancé," she said. "I remember. That word got back tomorrow," she said. "I heard it from Helen. She sent a second letter arrived 2 days ago. Morrow told Briggs that your personal situation was a liability, that a woman with a background in accounts who was also emotionally involved with the primary target was more dangerous than they'd anticipated." She paused. "He said, and I'm telling you exactly what Helen wrote," he said, "that woman is the reason this is failing." Luke looked at her. "Thaddeus Morrow," Clara said, "a lawyer with 20 years of experience in operations across 3 territories, identified me as the reason his scheme failed." Something moved across her face, not quite pride, not quite grief, something between them. "I want you to know that, because I want you to understand what I'm bringing with me if I stay. I am the kind of woman who becomes the reason things like this fail. That doesn't stop when the scheme stops. That's just who I am." Luke set his cup down. "Clara," he said, "that's not a warning. That's a recommendation." She looked at him for a moment. Then something in her face broke open quietly, without drama, the last piece of the management she had been maintaining since the train platform. She turned her head to the side and pressed her lips together and held it, and he let her hold it, and then she looked back. "Evelyn would have loved this ranch," she said softly. "The east bedroom, the sunrise." She stopped. "I used to imagine her here. When I was writing the letters, I used to think about what she would see when she arrived, and whether it would match what she'd hoped." "Does it?" Luke said. "Match what she hoped?" Clara looked at him steadily. "It's better," she said. "The kitchen held that." Luke reached across the table, not for her hand this time, just setting his hand on the table between them and offering a place. She looked at it. Then she put her hand over his the way he had done at the hearing, and they sat like that for a minute without speaking. "She asked me to come and tell you in person," Clara said, "because you deserved better than a letter." A pause. "I've been thinking about that. She knew, I think. She knew what she was asking me to do, and she knew what might come of it if—" She stopped, started differently. Evelyn was perceptive. She always saw things before they happened. It was extraordinary and occasionally infuriating. Her voice caught once cleanly. "I think she sent me here on purpose." "I think so too," Luke said. "That's either beautiful or she was extremely presumptuous," Clara said. "Both," Luke said. "Sounds like it was both." Clara laughed. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, a real one, unguarded, surprised out of her, and it changed her face into something he had not seen before and immediately wanted to see again. They ate supper together for the last time before she left for Galveston, and they talked, not about the case, not about evidence or filings, or what the Attorney General would do with the referral, but about other things, about the ranch, about what Clara had studied before she took the shipping position, which was mathematics, because she had found early in life that numbers did not lie unless a person made them, and she preferred working with things that had clear answers. About the garden in Galveston, the stubborn lavender that wouldn't bloom the way the book said it should, which had been Evelyn's, but which Clara had tended in the last months, and had apparently gotten one stalk to bloom in April, by ignoring every instruction and doing what seemed right instead. About Luke's family, his parents both gone a sister in Colorado. He wrote to occasionally, and who had been telling him for 3 years to stop being stubborn about being alone. "Are you going to write and tell her?" Clara asked. "I already did," Luke said. "Yesterday morning." Clara looked at him. "You were fairly certain of yourself." "I was certain of you," he said. "That's different." She considered that. "Yes," she said. "I suppose it is." The next morning came too fast and not fast enough the way mornings do when they carry something significant. Clara packed her things: the carpet bag with the broken clasp, the leather satchel, the notebook that had been filled, and a second one started in the last week of the case. She moved through the ranch house with the efficiency of someone who knew how to leave places who had done it before, and Luke stood out of her way and watched and said nothing because there was nothing useful to say. She came to the kitchen last. Looked at the table where they had worked for 4 weeks. Looked at the counter where the wildflowers had been. The jar was still there, empty and clean, because neither of them had moved it. She picked it up and held it for a moment. "When I come back," she said without turning, "I'd like to plant something, in the yard, something that comes back every year." "All right," Luke said. She set the jar down, turned around. "I'm not good at—" She stopped, started again. "I don't say things easily, the way you do. You just say things plainly and they land the way they're meant to. I have to. I usually have to think about it first." "I know," he said. "So I'm going to say this now," she said, "while I've thought about it." She looked at him directly with the full steadiness that was the most essentially Clara thing about her. "I came here to fulfill a promise for my sister. I stayed because 6 ranches needed someone who understood what Briggs had built. Those are the true reasons, and I'm not going to pretend they're more romantic than they are." She paused. "But somewhere in the middle of all of it, I stopped doing this for Evelyn. I stopped doing it for May Garrett, or Hank Delaney, or Pete Sorensen." She held his gaze. "I started doing it because this place and the people in it and you mattered to me. On their own. Not because Evelyn sent me. Just because they did." She stopped. "That's what I wanted to say." Luke crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and kissed her. Not with hesitation and not with drama, just directly the way he did everything that mattered. And she kissed him back with the directness that was her equivalent, and it was exactly as uncomplicated and as enormous as everything else between them had been. When they stepped back, she looked at him and said, "I'll be back in 4 weeks." 3, he said. Her mouth curved. "We'll see," she said. He drove her to the station. Carried her bags to the platform. The 9:40 to San Antonio, the same train, the same platform running in reverse. She stood where she had stood 4 weeks ago, when she stepped off and said the words that had stopped his life mid-motion, and now she was standing in the same place, going the other direction. "Last time you were on this platform," Luke said, "you said 4 words that knocked me completely flat." "I remember," she said. "You were right, by the way," he said. "You weren't a bought bride. You were never that. I just didn't know yet what you were instead." The train was coming. They could hear it. "What am I instead?" she said. He looked at her. "The person who saved everything I thought I'd lost," he said. "And then turned out to be the thing I hadn't known to look for in the first place." Clara held his gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her carpet bag, the clasp still broken, still meaning to fix it, and stepped toward the train. 4 weeks, she said. 3, he said. She boarded without looking back. But at the window, as the train began to move, she looked back. He raised his hand once. She held his gaze until the platform ended. Then she was gone. He stood there until the train was out of sight, which took longer than it should have, and not long enough. Then he drove home through the morning and went to work. The ranch was still the ranch, the stock still needed tending. The south fence still had 2 posts that needed resetting, and he worked through the day with the particular purposeful energy of a man who has something to come home to, which is different from all other kinds of energy and cannot be manufactured. 3 days after Clara left for Galveston, the first letter arrived from the Territorial Attorney General's office. The referral from Judge Horn had been received, a formal investigation into the activities of Thaddeus R. Morrow Harlan Briggs and the identified investor Caldwell was open. Luke was requested to preserve all documentation and make himself available for potential testimony. He wrote back the same day confirming all of it, and he added a note at the bottom asking that any further correspondence include Clara Harper as a co-recipient at an address he had in Galveston. 5 days after that, a letter came from Clara. She had arrived safely. The house in Galveston was smaller than she remembered and full of Evelyn's things, which was harder than she had anticipated, but not unbearable. She had found in a box in the back of the wardrobe the original letters, all 31 of them both sides. Luke's letters to Evelyn kept and tied with a piece of string and placed in a box that Clara was fairly certain Evelyn had known she would eventually find. She had not read them again. She did not need to. She knew them by heart. She had given notice on the house. She had arranged for Evelyn's things to go to appropriate places. She mentioned almost as an afterthought, found a nursery in Galveston that sold perennials, and she had purchased something called a prairie coneflower, which was apparently native to Texas, and came back reliably every summer and could survive difficult conditions without special care. She was bringing it with her in a pot. He read that letter 3 times. Then he went out to the east side of the yard and cleared a patch of ground next to the porch. Good soil enough sun protected from the worst of the afternoon wind, and he had it ready by the time she came back. She came back in 3 weeks and 2 days, which he counted, but did not mention. She came off the train with the carpet bag and the satchel and a ceramic pot wrapped in burlap, and the particular expression of a woman who has closed what needed closing and is ready to open what comes next. Luke was on the platform. He did not have wildflowers this time. He had thought about it and decided that wildflowers were for the first arrival, and this was not a first arrival. This was something else. Something that didn't need that kind of gesture, because it had already been built from better materials. He carried the bags, she carried the pot. They drove back to the ranch in the morning light, talking most of the way. She told him about Galveston, about the house, about the nursery, about a conversation she'd had with Helen Morrow, who was apparently planning to testify against her former husband, with a thoroughness that Thaddeus Morrow was presumably regretting ever having given her access to his files. Luke told her about the Attorney General's letter about a visit from Pete Sorensen, who had brought his wife and 2 daughters, and a pie that Luke had eaten half of in one sitting because he had not been eating regularly, and Pete's wife had seen it and said nothing, but left an extra loaf of bread on the counter. "They're looking after you," Clara said. "They're looking after us," he said. "They just haven't met the other half of us yet." She looked at him. "The other half," she said. "That's what I said." She turned and looked at the road ahead, and he could see from the angle of her face that she was managing something the way she managed things that were large, holding them carefully until she knew what to do with them. He let her hold it. When they pulled into the yard, she saw the cleared patch of ground next to the porch immediately. She climbed down and went to it and stood there for a moment looking at it, the careful turning of the soil, the way he had edged it cleanly, the size of it, which was larger than one plant needed. "You left room," she said. "You might want to add to it," he said. "Over time." She turned and looked at him standing by the wagon. The morning was doing something with the light that he wasn't paying any attention to, because he was looking at her face, which was doing what it had done in the kitchen the last evening before she left, fully open, fully present, not managed at all. She set the pot down carefully on the porch step. Then she walked back to him and took his face in both hands and kissed him the way she had apparently decided to do things when she'd had time to think about them completely, with full conviction, without any reservation at all. When she stepped back, she said, "I was thinking on the train." "About what?" he said. "About the first day," she said. "The platform, what I said." She looked at him steadily. "I said I wasn't your bought bride. And you froze. I thought at the time it was shock, that you were devastated because the thing you expected hadn't arrived." "It was shock," Luke said, "but not that kind." "I know that now," she said. "But I've been thinking about what it means, the phrase, bought bride. The whole premise of the arrangement letters exchanged a woman selected a passage paid for a role to be filled. She paused. That's not what happened between us, not one piece of it. We didn't select each other. We didn't audition for roles. She stopped. We were just two people in a crisis who were honest with each other and didn't stop when it got hard. She looked at him. That's the whole story. That's all it was. And it turned out to be everything. Luke looked at this woman who had come on a dead sister's train ticket with a broken carpet bag and a notebook, and a mind like a precision instrument, and a heart she had kept so carefully managed that it had taken 4 weeks of land fraud and late nights, and a territorial hearing to get it to come fully out into the open. And he thought about all the things he had been expecting when he stood on that platform with his wildflowers. The gentle, intelligent woman from the letters. The end of his loneliness. The future he had cleaned the house for, and fixed the hinges for, and picked flowers at dawn for. He had not gotten any of those things. He had gotten something that didn't have a name yet, that was still being built, that was going to require the same stubbornness that looked like calm that letter 12 had described from both of them equally without reservation. He had gotten exactly the right thing. I need to tell you something too, he said. Something I've been holding since the beginning. She waited. When you stepped off that train, he said, and you said those 4 words, I froze. You thought it was because the thing I'd been expecting hadn't arrived. He paused. It wasn't. I froze because the thing I'd been expecting had just become completely irrelevant, in about 4 seconds flat, and that had never happened to me before in my life. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, It happened to me on the 2nd day. The records, he said. The coffee, she said. You made me coffee, and you didn't say anything about it. You just put it down and walked away and let me work. I had been braced for... She stopped. It doesn't matter what I was braced for. The point is, you didn't do that. You just made the coffee and let me be who I was. She held his gaze. Do you know how rare that is? I'm starting to understand that it is, he said. She reached up and straightened his collar, a small, unconscious gesture, the kind a person makes when they have stopped thinking about whether they're allowed to touch someone and just do it because it's natural. And then she left her hand there at the base of his collar for a moment. Plant that coneflower with me, she said. Right now, he said. Right now, she said. They planted it together in the patch he had cleared, working side by side in the morning. She held the plant, and he set the roots, and they talked, while they worked about nothing in particular, about depth and drainage, and whether the afternoon sun was going to be too direct in August. And it was exactly as ordinary and as irreplaceable as anything had ever been. When they finished, Clara sat back and looked at it, the single plant in the center of the cleared space, the room around it for what came next. It'll come back every year, she said. So will you, Luke said. She looked at him. Then she looked at the plant. Then at the ranch around them, the yard, the barn, the house with the east bedroom, and the sunrise window, and the jar on the kitchen counter that had once held wildflowers and now held the particular meaning of everything that had begun there. In the weeks that followed, the Attorney General's investigation moved with the methodical speed of territorial law, which was to say, not fast, but forward. Harlan Briggs was formally charged with fraud and conspiracy in 3 territories. Thaddeus Morrow surrendered his law license pending criminal proceedings, and Helen Morrow, sitting in a Galveston courtroom with her husband's files in her hands, gave testimony that lasted 3 days, and was described by the presiding judge as the most comprehensively documented fraud account he had encountered in 20 years on the bench. The investor Caldwell was identified located in Denver, and indicted on federal conspiracy charges that carried consequences that made his Colorado debt look small by comparison. Wendell Cole cooperated. In exchange for a reduced charge, he provided a complete account of his involvement from the beginning, every Thursday, filing every piece of financial information passed to Briggs, every document he had touched or manipulated, or looked the other way from. He named Arthur Garrett, the former county clerk, as the man who had set up the original filing system and trained Cole in how to use it before leaving Sunset Ridge with a payment from Morrow's firm that was now part of the evidence record. The pending development notations were formally expunged from all 6 properties. The land contest filings were dismissed. Every contract signed with Briggs Development Associates was declared void as issued by a non-existent legal entity. 6 ranches along the Creek Valley got their land back. They had never actually lost it, not legally, not finally, but the thing about almost losing something is that it changes how you hold it afterward. Hank Delaney put a new fence along his south pasture. The good posts this time, not the ones he'd been meaning to replace. Pete Sorensen finally finished the barn extension he'd been putting off for 2 years. May Garrett hired a second farmhand and started talking about expanding her operation, which she had stopped talking about after her husband died, and which everyone who knew her agreed she should have been doing all along. Tom Birch bought a round at the saloon for every rancher involved and gave a toast that was mostly profanity, but contained at its core the accurate sentiment that things had worked out because the right person had gotten off the wrong train at exactly the right time. Clara Harper and Luke Callahan were married in Sunset Ridge on the second Saturday in October, in a ceremony held at May Garrett's property because May had insisted, and nobody had seriously argued, attended by 6 families of ranchers and a considerable portion of the town, and a letter read aloud by Luke that had come from his sister in Colorado, who said she had been waiting 3 years for this and was sorry she couldn't be there. And please tell the woman in question that anyone who took on a land fraud conspiracy single-handed was more than welcome in the Callahan family. Clara had laughed at that, really laughed the way he had first heard her laugh in the kitchen that one night unguarded and surprised. He intended to keep making her laugh like that for the rest of his life. On the morning after the wedding, Luke woke before sunrise habit. Years of it, the ranch demanding its own schedule, regardless of occasion. And he looked at the window where the light was beginning, and he thought about the east bedroom, and the sunrise he had put there for a woman he'd never met. And how entirely and correctly it had been claimed by a woman he had not expected. He heard Clara in this kitchen before he was fully up. The sounds of someone who had decided to belong somewhere and was acting accordingly, the clatter of the coffee pot, the specific sound of her setting 2 cups down. He came into the kitchen, and she was at the table with her notebook open, which he should have expected, and did expect, and was glad of, because Clara Harper did not stop being Clara Harper because of changed circumstances, and he didn't want her to. She looked up, saw him, looked at the window where the light was coming in from the east bedroom direction, long and pale and new. "Sunrise," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at him across the kitchen. This woman who had arrived with a broken carpet bag and a dead sister's promise, and had stayed for reasons that were first practical, and then honest, and then something that neither of them had planned for, and both of them had chosen. She had said once months ago on a train platform 4 soft words that had frozen him where he stood. She said them again now across the morning kitchen with the coffee between them and the light coming in and the prairie cone flower outside, claiming its patch of ground. "I'm not your bought bride," she said. Luke looked at her. The woman who had saved his land and his neighbors and the version of himself that had been quietly disappearing before she arrived. The woman who made coffee without being asked and laughed when she wasn't expecting to, and wrote letters that contained the truest things and held on to what mattered with both hands without making a performance of it. He didn't freeze this time. He crossed the kitchen, took her face in both hands, and said the truest thing he knew. "No," he said. "You were never that. You were the one I would have chosen if I'd been smart enough to know you were the one to choose." Clara put her hand over his, held it there. The sun came fully through the window, and in Sunset Ridge, Texas, on a ranch with a cleared patch of ground beside the porch, and a jar on the kitchen counter, and an east bedroom that finally held what it had been waiting for 2 people who had arrived at each other by the longest, most improbable, most necessary road, began the life that had always been waiting at the end of it. She was not his bought bride. She was not his mail-order promise, or his arranged future, or the woman from the letters. She was chosen, freely, fully, finally, and that made all the difference in the world.